Hello everyone and welcome to the EfficientIP webinar titled Network and Security Teams Collaboration, a Key to Successful Digital Transformation, presented by Peter Goodwin. I am your host, Pascal Tanga-Pregassam, EfficientIP Senior Technical Marketing Specialist, and we realize your time is very valuable, so thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. If you are joining us live, you will receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the replay recording of this session. We would hope that you would share this link with your peers so they can view this webcast on demand at their convenience. Also attached to this same email will be a link to download a copy of the slide from today. Taking a look at today's agenda, this webinar is based on the report NetSecOps, aligning networking and security teams to ensure digital transformation from EMA, that you can download on the resource page of our website. We will use data extracted from the report throughout this presentation to explain how collaboration between network and security teams is key to a successful digital transformation. Then we will be hosting a question and answer session at the end of the live broadcast. Peter and myself will be available at this time for any more technical question on our solution. To ask a question, simply enter it into the question pane in your webinar console, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, Peter Goodwin, Sales Engineering Director EMEA for EfficientIP, based in the UK. He's been in the DDI space for over 10 years. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pascal. And just before we start, we're essentially talking about a report that deals with the merging of two sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating teams. And I thought I'd just draw an analogy from a sport that I'm quite passionate about, because the data we're going to be talking around later started to become relevant about 10 years ago. And within the sport of rugby, and what you see in front of you is England against Australia from a World Cup a while ago. But they started pulling data from the players around 10 years ago, and it's the GPS that every international and a lot of club players have on their backs now. And what this does is provides telemetry information on where on the pitch the players are, what their impacts are like, and just general stats on their playing. And there are two teams within an organization such as England Rugby or Australia Rugby. One looks at attack and one looks at defense, and they both have a need for the data that that device supplies. But their requirements are different. They use it in different ways, but they need the same data, so they share it. And that's probably one of the crux or the things that we need to think about when we look at how network ops and security ops merge. There's an awful lot of data that they both need, and today we're going to talk about some of it. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking around the EMA report findings and what they recommend to make a successful collaboration. And at the end, we'll show a demo that shows from our IPAM, our IP address management, when we can create a subnet and we can pass that automatically into two-fin secure track, so that changes are made in either get reflected back. So let's just start with why the report says people should collaborate. There's a number of reasons. We can't talk about all of these today, but the report goes into a lot more detail on this. And when you get the printout of this presentation, there's a quote from on most of the slides, there's a quote that comes out of that report just to kind of highlight the aspects to do with the slide that you're reading. So what EMA said was around 75% of the customers that they polled have started to look or increasing the collaboration between the two teams. The unfortunate thing is only 39% have actually been very successful at this, and that means there's a gap somewhere. And the question is, why? Why is there a gap? But you just have to look at the competing needs of the teams. And sometimes where the network team is all about making a highly available, high performant network, and the security team is about lowering the risk to the business and protecting the network, sometimes they're not always 100% aligned. If I'm in NetOps and I want to know what's connected, what networks do I have, can I get a subnet, can I get a free IP address, that's where I need my IPAM data. But the security guys, they want to deploy security policies, and DNS is a really good place for that. They want to know who had an IP address forensically after the event. If they see an IP has triggered something, they might want to know who actually owned that IP address at the time. They might want to know where it is as well. And if they can, they'd ideally like to know which user triggered a security breach that came up. And there are other ops teams within an organization. DevOps might need to know where applications are deployed. Before they launch a service out into the world, it needs to have an IP address and probably a DNS name. So there are a number of conflicting things that the teams need the data for, but the underlying data, if it's IP related, needs to be shared between the two. So why are companies doing the collaboration? And there are a number of drivers. They tend to come under the phrase of digital transformation. That's one of the current kind of buzzwords or buzz phrases that you hear. And there are a number of things driving that behind. IoT is a big one. Public cloud or private cloud adoption is another big one that a lot of companies are doing. COVID's had a massive impact with working from home or working from anywhere. And we're probably never going to go back to the way it was before. But there's a number of different drivers that are all kind of grouped together as digital transformation projects, that if network and security operations works more closely together, there are benefits to be had. But to get to those benefits, we have to overcome some challenges. We're going to pick two out of this to talk about. So we don't cover everything in this report as far as a challenge, but we can help with data quality and authority. We can help with the tools that enable automation so that data can be passed automatically between two platforms. So we'll talk about both of these. And EMA go on about this, that they think network data it's a key thing to be able to do the analysis from a security perspective, but also from a network perspective. And in 83% of organizations, it's the security team need the data. And then they think that 91% of the companies that they polled, they want the automation tools to actually facilitate the collaboration a lot easier, so that the security tool set can talk to the network tool set and pull the information when it needs or get it pushed into them in both ways. So let's just think about network data. So EMA recommends a central repository for the data, that the data is shared, and that both teams have access to the data they need. Those are the recommendations from the report. How can DNS, DHCP, IP address management help in this thing? So from an IPAM perspective, it's having that network source of truth. What IPs, subnets, ranges, devices do I have in my network? Historically, who had a particular IP address? Having a single pane of glass management across my DDI estate, so where my DNS servers are, my DHCP ranges are, having it all in one place so that I can find the data I need when I need it. And then it's having the ability, with role-based access, to allow people access to the data they need when they need it. So having full control of the rights. And if we look at the tool set for network management, EMA make a series of recommendations. We pulled 3. Network configuration and change management, so looking at what's going on in the network, where things are, inventory information, configs, things like that. Security policy automation to be able to push security policies out into the network, and then automating DDI so that if you make a change in IPAM, it's reflected in DNS and DHCP. Those are just 3 of their recommendations. There are some more. How do we do that, or help you with this from a DDI perspective? Well, IPAM is a great place as a single source of truth for your IP related data, IP subnets, DHCP ranges, that kind of thing. DNS security, it's a really good first line of defense, because pretty much every transaction that happens on a network is initiated by a DNS query. Not 100%, some people will use hard-coded IP addresses in things that they're trying to get to, but the majority uses the DNS name, and the DNS server resolves it to the IP. So putting a layer of security at the DNS level, it's the first thing that happens. It's also a really good place to put data exfiltration protection, because most malware uses DNS to exfiltrate data. And then allowing for automation between the infrastructure components, so things like 2FIN Secure Track or a NAC or a vulnerability scanner, and we can push events to that, to leverage the DDI data and the events as they happen. So having an inbound and outbound API to allow other systems access to the DDI data, and for DDI platforms to inform other solutions of things happening in the network. And that's where we can help. So we're going to run a couple of demos, which I'll voice over for you in a minute or two. The first one is around a use case where we're going to look at from IPAM, from the EfficientIP solid server, our IPAM solution, to interact with Secure Track from 2FIN. And there's a few things. We can get the list of the Secure Track zones from Secure Track to start with, so that then they're inside the IPAM. We can add subnets back into Secure Track when they're created or they're amended or they're deleted. We can reflect, we can ensure that the 2 solutions are in sync together. So I'll just run the video, the demo video. And what we're going to show here is network operations being kept in sync. We're going to make calls from EfficientIP into Secure Track. We're going to add and change a subnet, and we'll see that the changes are reflected into both. And we start with 2 network spaces. The first is Azure. The one we're going to look at is the campus network. And within the campus network, there'll be a series of subnets. Is it playing? I don't think so. No, it's playing. So we go into the campus networks. What we can see here is that we've got some wired networks, we've got some DMZs, and we've got a wireless network. If we go into 2FIN, where we can see all the different zones, we can see the campus, the wireless, the clouds, and the DMZs. And one thing to point out within this is it's not just end networks. We can put blocks in as well. So the first thing we're going to do is add a zone. So we'll click on the add zone, we'll enter the data. We're going to call this one new demo zone. And once we've typed it in, we'll save it. And we should see that it pops up at the bottom of the list on the left. So now if we go back to EfficientIP and the IPAM, we'll look at the administration page and we'll go into our custom rules. And this is what controls the automation side. And if we look for the Secure Track, we can see 3 rules. The first 2 are for adding and deleting networks. And the last one is the one that synchronizes. Now this is running on a regular scheduled basis. The first 2 are essentially running asynchronously. So they're event driven rather than scheduled. And what that means is when something's created or deleted, it'll get notified to Secure Track. So let's just check we've imported the new data. So under TUFIN Security, we should see the new demo zone. And there it is. So this has been imported into IPAM and we're able to use it. So let's go back into administration. And we'll go to one of the wired networks. And we'll add a new one. So under campus, we'll click to add one. We're going to put it into TUFIN. And we want a 24-bit network, so we'll select that. We'll go on to the next page, and we'll get a series of options for what networks are available. And depending on the size, they would change. So we can see 109 is free between 108 and 110, so we'll pick 109. And we'll call it Thiel, which is a place in the UK, and we're just giving it a name because it's going to be a campus location. So once we've created it, and there are a few things we can pick, but we'll pick out the new demo zone at the bottom so that it's in the right place, we think. And then once we've created it, we'll then go back to Secure Track. We'll just check to see that it got added. So we can see that new demo zone is in IPAM. And now we go back into Secure Track. We'll look at it. We refresh in new demo zone, and there it is. The Thiel networks come up. Now, really, we don't want this in the new demo zone. It should be with the wired networks that are in the campus network. So let's go back and correct things. So we're back in IPAM. We'll pick the Thiel and we'll edit it. And we kind of want to move this. So we'll go through there and we'll go to the next page. And then instead of new demo zone, we'll pick campus networks. And then we'll do an OK. And then we'll come back to TUFIN and we'll do a refresh. And we can see that that network has gone from new demo zone and it should be under the campus networks, and there it is. And this just demonstrates how we can do the changes from IPAM into TUFIN or TUFIN back into IPAM, and it just keeps those two systems synchronized. And you don't have to do anything manually. So in the second use case, what we now have is we're going to demonstrate how we can do orchestration and automation using an API. For this, we're going to use Postman as the tool of choice, but this could be ServiceNow, it could be Ansible, Terraform, or any of the other popular tools that our customers use today. And what we'll do is we'll send a call from Postman into IPAM. This will then send another API sync to TUFIN and reflect the data through into TUFIN. So I will now play the demo. Let's click it in. And the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to do this for a wireless network to start with. So we've got the IPAM GUI up at the moment. And on the right-hand side at the back, you'll see Postman, and that's just about ready to hit send for the Thiel wireless network. And have I clicked it again? Yes, we're good. So having sent it, once it's gone, then we'll change and we'll do the wired network. So we need to do a few things, change the network address, change the secure track zone that we're going to put it into from the wireless to the wired. And we'll do that, and then we'll add it, and then we'll send it across. So now we've done that, we can go back to IPAM, we can refresh it, and we'll see the two networks there. So the Thiel wireless and the wired are in there. So then we can go and look at Secure Track and just make sure that they've come across. So again, we can see both networks. And the beauty of this is what happens because of our inheritance. So because this network is in this block, and let's just opening it up, what we're looking at is the DNS, the domain name. And we're using 2finnovate.nam.intranet, which is an inherited attribute. But the wireless is different because it's inherited from a different place. And if we look down, it's GSSTC is the domain name that we've inherited from the network. And we didn't put any of these parameters in when we were creating using Postman. They're just inherited in the system. And what this gives administrators is tremendous power over controlling policies when they're adding entities into IPAM. And that's, again, it's just showing that using the API, we can connect two systems and automate a lot of what needs to be done to keep two systems in synchronization. So that's pretty much the end of what we were going to present today. So just to talk about the key takeaways from our point of view is when we're looking at collaborating between network ops and SecOps and actually enabling that collaboration with automation, the key thing is network data and the metadata that is associated with it within the IP address management. It's having the ability with a performant API to pull that information out, push that information in, and then to have events triggering other things as well. And it's not just network and security, it's other teams that need this data or need access to it. So we can look at network ops and security ops as a pairing, but actually there are more sides to the three, at least with DevOps, that there are more teams that need access to the data. And then I'll just quickly give you some idea about EfficientIP. We're a French company, headquartered in Paris, but we have offices in Philadelphia and Singapore. We specialize in DDI, DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. And the vision's just to make networking simple and secure. And the more we help our customers with the APIs that can make the security stack and the network stack work better together. And the Germans have a word for that called Gestalt, which is it's bigger than the sum of its parts. It just helps our customers. We've got over 1,000, and it's primarily around improving efficiency, reducing risks, and lowering costs. And again, we've got a ton of customers around the world. Are there any questions? If you have a question, if you put it in the questions pane, and then they'll come through to us.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So we'll now going to move to the question and answer portion of the webcast. So I see we already have a few questions here. So please feel free to also type into the question pane as we move along, and we will get to as many as we can. So first question, Peter. So how would you start such collaboration between the two teams?
How would I start? Right. Probably working out what data is needed by each team. So networks have a particular need for some data, and typically IPAM sits within a networks team, but they need to understand what data the security teams get and how they're going to consume it and who's going to consume it within the team, so you can get the role-based access right. But yeah, probably a gap analysis or at least an idea of what data is needed.
Okay, thank you. So another question, when you said DNS security, what do you need by that?
It can be a few things. So typically from a DNS security perspective, we look at it in three ways. There's reputational protection, where you check each query against known threat indicators, so threat data feeds that you can purchase or download from various other vendors, and you just use those on the DNS server. But then we can look at protecting the DNS platform itself from flood attacks and things like that. And the more insidious thing is the data exfiltration, which is the kind of where people will leak data out using DNS queries. And most malware does this today, and it's incredibly difficult to stop. And we can do those three things on the DNS server. And if you stop things at the DNS server, it stops the traffic going further up the stack is always helpful. So it's normally reputational, signature-based, or behavioral checks that we can perform at the DNS level.
Okay. I've got another one. What are some other popular security tools that integrate with this this way with APIs?
Well, any of them really. I mean, the one I mentioned, the vulnerability scanner, is always a good use case, because typically when someone wants to scan an employee's laptop or whatever, it has to be on the network. So normally you'd have to schedule a time that you know someone's going to be there so that you can then perform the scan. But if you can imagine, when you log in on a PC, the DHCP server tells the vulnerability scanner, I've given this IP address out, and it's maybe this user and it's this Mac or laptop or whatever, but it tells the vulnerability scanner, this IP is now live on the network and this is the MAC address. The vulnerability scanner can just scan the PC. It doesn't need to have a manual scheduling of a time to be on the network. It just knows it. And that's one thing. Sending data to a SIM so that you have a bit more contextual information about what triggered a particular security rule. If you can give the IP address and the user that in Active Directory says it's got that IP address, then that's more contextual information for the security ops guys that gives them a little bit more information, saves a bit of time in what they need to do for triage. Those are the kind of things.
Okay. Not showing any other questions. So I will go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you very much, of course, to Peter for giving us an overview analysis of the EMA report results. And finally, a big thank to all of you who attended on the line. On the resource section of our website, you can download the EMA report from which the figures and the quotes we used in this webinar were extracted, and many more. So please look at the email with the link to this presentation and the slide within the next 24 hours. And if you have any further questions or comments, do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks you again, everyone. And with that, we will close this session. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.